So here we're very happy to claim that we have been producing the very first organic regenerative tobacco worldwide, documented with scientific data that is upscalable anytime, anywhere. It's a soil microbiological, agronomical management turned into some operational transition project management, and this is what we're offering. The yield is equal, more or less -3%. We decompacted around more 178% of depth, -37% of pests and disease, -100% of fertilizing costs, -34% of phytosanitary costs, and finally, on the microbiology, a fungal to bacterial ratio higher of 50%, and all the other functional group, the second and the third trophic level, above 100%. So we measured the yields just right before harvest, and we could figure out that our yields were nearly equal to theirs, which means we measured the number of leaves that were useful for harvest at that precise time, at that particular time. So we've measured the useful leaves harvestable. Basically, on our side, we were reaching at that time 6.4 leaves harvestable per plant against 6.6. It's a difference of 3%, which means basically not relevant at all. We can proudly say that we reach the same yields as they do. And here we could actually reduce the overall cost of fertilization itself of 100%. Basically, a conventional regime in these parts of the world costs $1,500 per manzana, which is less than an hectare. The organic regime, because the product that they buy is a little more expensive, probably because just labeled and painted in grain, costs $1,700 per manzana. And for us, it just had the cost of putting the compost together and then just bringing it out to the field, right? Which, if we look at it from a commercial point of view, now talking about microbiology, so there is a relationship between the proportions of the functional groups that we have in the soil in relationship with the actual plants that you grow above ground. So the more you go to the forest, the more you'll have fungi in your soil. As a matter of fact, forests are the best places to find fungi. When you go foraging for fungi, this is where you go. So we had to just look first what was in the soil, and then bring our microbiologically loaded compost and then compost extract and all these kind of things back in our regenerative regime. We remember as well that this microbiology is organized as a trophic chain, which means that the one eats the other. What does that mean? It's kind of a shortcut to the concept of the poop loop. One eats the other and then releases some compound which is certainly plant available, right? So bacteria being eaten by protozoa, and then fungi are eaten by fungal feeding nematodes and other protists and other protozoa as well. And then here we go up to the chain, up until the animals above ground that are eating the top level predators in the soil, such as earthworms. So looking at this, looking at precisely these measurements that we can quantify, so we have both quantity and quality, because we're talking about identifying functional groups, but then here we're going to focus on the fungal to bacterial ratio. Within a period of time of less than 1 month, we could reach an increase of 50% of this ratio in terms of fungal to bacterial ratio. What does that mean? We had brought way more fungal back into our soils that had enabled the actual same productivity as the conventional. Now entering the trophic levels, the other trophic levels, which means the one who are eating the first functional groups that we just talked about, so i.e. fungi and bacteria, well, we could also see an increase of more than 100% of those that are eating the bacteria and the fungi, right? So what does that mean? We could ensure ourselves that we had a way faster nutrient cycling, because we had a bigger predating momentum happening in our soils. So we've reached above 100% for all of those groups. And the same happened with the nematodes. We could see an increase of more than 1000%, because the one conventional and like conventional organic didn't see any, and we would see way more than them. And all that is part of the framework that we manage, and then we use from a scientific posture, so we make sure we monitor the whole thing. Another interesting point is like we could also witness way less of those disease-causing fungi. So to say, people, you agronomists probably know about these, called omycetes, and those omycetes are mostly responsible for disease in our plants. And here, the total biomass of those omycetes were around minus 40%. Talking about compaction, this is a very common factor that we can see happening in our agricultural fields, and this is due to the plowing. The mechanic plow itself, by its own action, creates what we call a plow pan, a compaction layer at the depth at which you have plowed. Then one of the main goals for that is twofold: decompaction, and then create the condition so we don't recreate the compaction itself, which means stop plowing, or actually using light or low plow, low till techniques. On our side, we have used, for that project, we got asked whether or not we wanted to actually use their plow, and we refused, and we went for a more, let's say, natural way, and we used horses. And the second tool, after we had not plowed, actually we just lightly, very gently plowed just the beds where we would plant and leave the rest growing. We also used our microbiology to work the structuring of the soil. In other words, the microbiology is decompacting, or is having a decompacting role in our soils. So we had used a very handy tool called a penetrometer, and we measured the difference of compaction for each of the systems that we have. We were working ours and theirs, and basically the depth of compaction, which means the maximum compaction that a plant can push roots in, so to say 150 psi, and its depth. So at what depth we were reaching this 100 psi, and our system had a compaction layer deeper of 178%, which means the depths at which the roots could grow were way deeper on our systems compared to their systems. And of course, visually, we could then later pull out the plant and see the whole depth of where, of the whole rhizosphere of our plants, which means we would leave the roots be able to spread out and go find all the natural nutrients that they were needing without stressing the plant, but also without having any compaction layer at which we would have an anaerobic organism where most of the disease-causing organisms are growing. The field where we worked had received some sort of cover crop. We've been asked if we wanted to remove it. We said no. So we kept all the cover crops that we would manage on a specific way. And later, using companion planting in the row with the surroundings, we could just monitor that the total number of pests were actually lower in our fields than in theirs. What does that mean in terms of number? We have a total of like more than 15 to 20 pests that we know supposedly are damaging our tobacco, and in this overall number they had 11 occurrences of those pests on a meaningful way, and we just had 7. 37% decrease of pest incidence. Now, this lesser incidence of pest has also caused a lesser spending or applications of fertilizing of phytosanitary costs, because we had a very precise follow-up week by week of all those pests. We could adjust the amount of those products that we put at field. So as a consequence, we could decrease the cost of phytosanitary products of 20%. A phytosanitary regime on the conventional part costs $1,200 per manzana, less than an hectare. And ours, we could get it down to $927 per manzana. So we can, and we are pretty confident that by continuing working this ecosystemic design on a farm using microbiology and all these kind of tools, we would be able to decrease it probably to 0. An interesting fact that we could witness: we had this cover crop growing all over the place around our trial field, but also in the streets between the beds. So we could monitor, we could control, and we could work the cover crops inside our walking path between the beds. But what happened, we could see that when they started to work the surrounded fields that had the remaining cover crops, which mean a shelter for any other insect, would you call it pest or not, when they prepared the field to put their new tobacco in, so they came in and they plowed it again, but didn't plow ours, of course, we had a massive increase from one day to the other of incidents of whiteflies in our fields, so as much as in their fields. And we can see these data very clearly in both trials, the conventional, the organic conventional, and the regenerative. For us, we have the data. It's a surge from the day they have done the plowing to the next day. What does that tell us? It tells us that we need an ecosystem around what we are growing, so we make sure we don't open the full buffet to the pest and insect that will just go and feast on our plants. The owner/producer asked us to anticipate the seeding and transplanting of the tobacco at field. We were way ahead of the normal season. There were also an existing organic regime for which they were buying their organic product in the corner shops. What does that mean? It means like the product that they were using were actually produced by the same companies that are actually already selling the existing synthetic product without labels, without. That precise project also received twice the amount of rain in comparison with the seasonal averages. We had to anticipate this in the design of the actual agronomic techniques with which we have grown the tobacco. We could also enjoy a comparison with the conventional. The whole context went that they were so much rain and they were so much struggling with their actual organic technique that they decided to switch back from organic/conventional to full conventional. Operationally speaking, we indeed had 3 phases. We could enjoy a decent amount of compost, so we could just input this solid form of compost at the feet of each plant. Then we had worked with compost extract that we did put in the drench, so a couple of times with a couple of those bioagents and minerals and all these kind of things that we've used. And then entering a foliar application with the same compost extract with some other, that time, organic oils and other products that we know are working for the phytosanitary products. And then we harvest at 65 days. So, talking about the project itself, we previously mentioned we have 2 main components, which is one, an excellent compost that we realize with a specific recipe, and the second one is the compost tea brewer for extracting the microbiology out of the previously mentioned compost. So talking about the compost itself, you want to think about it from a biological succession point of view, relating ourselves to the humus which happens naturally in the forest. We are recreating a humus, but human-made. What does that mean? We will now have a simplified idea of a most biodiverse recipe, so we recreate, or we get the closest as possible to what happens in the forest. So then we recreate the conditions where we would have all the functional groups, microbiological functional groups that are and have always evolved in symbiosis with the plants. They are responsible for making the nutrient available to plants. 1, a good compost. And 2, a compost tea brewer in a liquid form. The main point here is to keep the medium itself, would that be the compost or the compost tea brew itself, in an aerobic form that opposes itself to anaerobic, which means deprived from oxygen. So we're working in oxygen-rich conditions, and we make sure we have both of those in both the compost and the compost tea brewer. How important the quality of a compost is and its relationship with microbiology. Well, these people have been producing some compost using some cow manure coming from the neighbors, which cows have been grazed in rice fields post-harvest that had received this nasty chemical 2,4-D. We realized that the compost that they made had this 2,4-D in it when we actually spread the compost at field. So it had a massive effect on our plants, which is called leaf curling. So as soon as we realized this, we just stopped using that compost and transferred with another compost, and we have boosted our recipes with all of the bioagents that we had and the best vermicompost that we had, so we could kind of get back on track with our plants. It's very interesting and crucial to control most of the parts of this supply chain when you go into regeneration, and the compost itself is one of those. People will tell you, yeah, well, you just let decompose that thing and that thing. That's not true, right? We are proving that the opposite stands. We need an extra quality compost replicating the forest humus. So we make sure we provide our plants with the right minerals, nutrients and microbiology so they can express their maximum potential. So we enter your spot with a goal to also change the way we design our agricultural systems, because you remember we start off from a monocultural, and then we will tend to go the closest to a multi-species, biodiverse ecosystem, which means our farm will be designed as an ecosystem, which means multiple biological living beings that will engage, that will help support the health of our system to first reach regeneration of the actual system, and then reach a sustainable momentum, so we continue to have similar yields and similar quality all the time. So when we design the whole ecosystem with your operational modes, we will be able to include where and when we are engaging using the compost tea brewer, and where and when using the biocomplete compost, with what machines. We started with early diagnostic from the microbiology side of things. We have a whole framework, pretty robust framework that enables us to quantify and qualify the whole functional groups that are an indicator for us in what health your soil is. Then it helps us to set up a baseline, so then when we have achieved the work, we can then compare how much progresses we have done in terms of regenerating. Really important, applying the scientific method. And then we add up a couple of side analysis coming from other laboratories, and it works with some specific tests that we know of. So we make sure as well we have kind of a real broad picture of what. So we make sure we have a real hand on our regenerative momentum in your system. Talking about project management for transitioning your system, we engage in reviewing your whole operational context, which means, of course, your seasons, of course, your rotation, of course, your machinery, the product that you use, the seeds that you use, so we can actually deploy a site strategy that will synchronize with your current operation, so we disturb the less. A very key point too is reviewing with you the main staff that would be the most compatible to execute the project in its best conditions. It's of course a transition project, which means it requires some profile in your organization of people that can understand something which is relatively new. So then these people can move resources in your organization and actually engage in some more like synchronized action for making the best of it. And we know this is a key element. Sharing with you that we are really happy and enthusiastic to be able to claim that we can and we will be able to reproduce a full 100% organic regenerative tobacco. We are fundamentally feeling strong now to upscale that in any place, any climate, for anyone, not mentioning that this methodology also applies to any crop. Why do we actually smoke cigars? Indeed, cigar has been discovered by the Spaniards when they came over colonizing Peru. Entering the jungle, they saw those old native having a smoking stick in their mouth, and they indeed found that fun and somehow brought it back to Europe as a really nice and fun habit to actually blow some smoke out there, and it becomes very famous in the saloon and all these kind of things. But beyond all that, the origin of that plant is like it's a mosquito repellent. So initially these people have these sticks with tobacco because it repels mosquito, right? Then it also helps to cure wounds when they go out in the jungle working with their two hands, because they have the tobacco stick here in the mouth and then the two hands to work. Well, if they wound themselves with whatever hook or thorn, they'll just take a bit of Dermapat, apply it, and then they'll be cured. It's also a plant that helps to cure stomach disease, or dis-ease, let's say, more easy, more to the point. And finally, it also, when you have it planted in the ground, it also repels snakes.